Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to speak about an ongoing study, it's incomplete, on the interrelationship of higher frequencies in the brain and higher states of consciousness. And the question is, does 40 hertz brainwave emission correlate with higher consciousness? There's been a fair amount of work implicating the frontal lobe of the brain. That's the upper cerebral cortex in the front of the head with higher consciousness. And actually in my study, I'm recording frequencies at 40 hertz right above the third eye. So it's in the center of the forehead, and it's interestingly just a very short distance from a spot that is in the esoteric literature associated with clairvoyance, etc., known as the third eye. You probably know this, I'll go over it quickly, that the various bands in the EEG have been correlated functionally. For example, the slowest waves, delta 0 to 4 hertz with deep dreamless sleep, theta waves 4 to 7 hertz with dreams, a sort of reverie, and also certain paranormal experiences, including out of the body. Alpha is sort of the baseline alert, relaxed state, 7 to 12 hertz. Beta is the active concentration, 13 to 35 hertz. And then we have a gamma band beyond that, 35 to 50 hertz. And actually, there may be even higher emissions from the brain. The point is that people haven't looked until relatively recently because their analog recorders weren't fast enough to record these high frequencies. So only in the digital age have we been able to really see the high frequency emission from the brain. And consequently, the literature in this area is way behind. Just to give you a summary of what has been done here, people looking at practices such as yoga, meditation, and other mind-body-spirit practices find up to 20% more activity in the EEG coming out of the frontal lobe. And there are a few studies on yoga and meditation, but not very many, that suggest an association of 40 hertz from the frontal lobe with clarity and compassion. So in particular meditations, for example, certain Buddhist meditations in the lineage of the Dalai Lama in particular have been studied with that. A couple of recent studies, again, on Buddhist meditation. There was a study by Lutz et al. Published in 2004 showing increases in that band, the gamma band and high beta, at the prefrontal location during meditations where they were trying to enhance unconditional love and compassion. And another study showed even more detail, correlations between amplitudes of 40 hertz recorded from this site and a reported clarity of meditation on a moment-to-moment basis. And that was published by Davidson in 2005. Here's a little bit of data from the Davidson paper. Controls shown on the left-hand side are people who are non-meditators, and this is the percent more 40 hertz from the prefrontal region during baseline, etc. They can't make much more than just a few percent over baseline, whereas the meditation practitioners make highly significantly more above baseline. Furthermore, meditators have a higher baseline of 40 hertz, as well as during meditation and post-meditation. They don't return to their normal baseline as quickly. Another key function, however, of 40 hertz goes beyond higher brain functions. It seems to have what we call a more important role in the brain associated with heightened awareness. Some have called it the event binding rhythm in response to meaningful stimuli. So for example, when you are seeing, hearing, and feeling the presence of a UFO, 40 hertz brainwaves are being produced. And Benjamin Libet found that increase in 40 hertz precedes the awareness of a perception by about half a second. Francis Crick, who did a lot of work in neuroscience after his work on DNA, called 40 hertz the neural correlate of consciousness. In the literature, it's abbreviated NCC. I conducted a pilot study, which is still in progress, looking at the functional significance of 40 hertz from the prefrontal region, and here are my 3 research questions. What is the perceived inner state during 40 hertz emission? Do meditators produce more 40 hertz than non-meditators at baseline? And with neurofeedback, which supports feedback particularly at 40 hertz. And then I have one case to show you on the effect of taking an entheogen, Salvia divinorum, and the effect on 40 hertz brainwaves from prefrontal region. The subjects in the meditation experiment were 10 of them so far. I hope to increase that. Meditators and non-meditators ranging from 31 to 62 years old. 7 women, 3 men. The inclusion and exclusion criteria were such that I took people who were not ill, neither acute nor chronic diseases, and with no diagnosed cognitive problems or issues. The meditators were fairly advanced, practicing at least 5 to 6 times a week for 10 plus years, and I have 2 of the meditators in my study were over 20-year meditators. And we did record their practices. There were a variety of practices from Zen to Vipassana, and the third, I think, is a transcendental meditator. So the protocol was as follows. The subjects came in one at a time on appointments for about an hour. And first they were exploring the 40 hertz neurofeedback on their own for 10 minutes to just see what they thought about it in terms of whether they could increase 40 hertz production and notice what states were associated with that. And after they did this for 10 minutes, I asked them to verbally describe the state associated with enhanced peaks of 40 hertz. And we took down their responses as qualitative data. Then I asked the subject to cultivate a specific state specified by an adjective, for example, the word satisfied or the word disappointed, and asked them to determine and give me a value on a scale between minus 100 to plus 100 to what extent that state was related to the 40 hertz state. And we used 16 different adjectives. Fourth, the subject was asked to engage in a baseline state, which is a neutral state of consciousness without focus or intent. And I recorded 40 hertz for 1 minute. And finally, after the subject has had all of this experience toward the end of the hour, I asked the subject to try to produce as high a value of or amplitude of 40 hertz in 3 consecutive 10-second periods using the neurofeedback, which was either audio, visual, or both. So they could meditate or do as they wish. Neurofeedback, in case you're not familiar with it, is a type of biofeedback in which a person is fed back some information about their own brainwaves in a real sensory mode using auditory or visual means or both. And the purpose of this is to allow them to change or shift their brain waves, shift their function. It's used in research as well as in the clinic for learning disorders, mood disorders, sleeplessness, addictions, and other disorders and conditions, typically by psychologists. The particular neurofeedback system that I used in the study was the Peak Achievement Trainer by Neurotech. It records 40 hertz and other brain waves from a single point in the center of the forehead while filtering out EMG. I should point out that a lot of people have not recorded 40 hertz and higher frequencies from the brain because they're concerned about potential contamination from muscle tension and twitching, because there is some overlap at high frequencies. But this system does filter out EMG. This system further integrates the signals from both hemispheres, as we're recording in the center, to measure synchrony between the hemispheres. And it provides both auditory and visual feedback in its software. It prevents eye blink artifact by using a low-frequency filter and not collecting data during eye blink. There's a picture of one of the headbands used. The band is simply placed around the head, and the active recording electrode at the center of the forehead. There's a neutral and a ground. And it's a wireless system, so one could presumably also study people doing various activities, even golf. The results. The non-meditator's self-assessment at peak values of 40 hertz are as follows. These are statements or abstracted bits from their comments. Detachment from myself, trust in something bigger. Letting something higher come into my consciousness, not trying from the ego. Joy and bliss. Alert, focused on something new, being in the moment. Warmth from the heart chakra and the bottom of feet. Thinking of people I love, including love for those who have passed on. Curiosity, enthusiasm, novelty of experience, connection with an angelic realm. I should say, here's the meditators. The meditators had these things to say for their peak values of 40 hertz. Joy, clairvoyance, a loving feeling, open heart chakra, relaxed and calm, receptive, a fuzzy feeling, feeling close to the center of the brain. Pure love, childlike wonder and anticipation of something new and good. thinking higher thoughts, core connection to the absolute, the opposite of stress. I should also point out that there were people who said they couldn't really put into words some of these states, so they did their best. That's, of course, always a problem in describing higher consciousness. Group results for perceived relationship between the adjectives that I provided in the 40 Hertz states were as follows. I'll have to move quickly. As you notice, the peak value there, although the standard deviations are high, but at the top of the list is happiness and a loving state, and the others are all down the line. And negative associations were with the adjectives disappointment, stress, distress, alertness, focus, concentration. The comparison of meditators and non-meditators' baseline values, we did not see a difference. This is in contradiction to the earlier literature gathered by Davidson et al. However, my group was small. 3 meditators so far in the study and 7 non-meditators. However, during the maximizing 40 Hertz during the neurofeedback period, we did see a highly significant difference between non-meditators who didn't do better than 10%. Some actually went down, and meditators who were up between 23 and 36% more 40 Hertz. Now I want to show you one case of a volunteer who took Salvia divinorum, which is an entheogen. It's a psychedelic herb used in shamanic ceremonies by indigenous healers in Mexico. It's legal. 28-year-old volunteer who had previously experienced this herb. Just show you how the time kinetics of it. I took a measurement at 7:37 p.m. baseline. 7:45 p.m. she smoked salvia and experienced a peak intensity 10 minutes to 15 minutes later, and then already at 8:04 there was a coming down from the state of post-peak intensity, and finally she felt fully recovered at 8:18 p.m. So it's less than an hour. I have very little time, but just to show you something about her baseline and focus on this. This is a brain spectrogram, so we have 1 minute of time versus frequency. Mostly she's in the relaxed mode, 10 Hertz or less, with occasional bursts up at higher frequencies. During the peak state, however, there's a lot of eye blink. That's what all these green lines are. And there was a lot of movement. And the subject, as you see, the brainwaves are now enhanced in all frequencies. The lower frequencies are just are off the scale, actually, and there are also activity at 40 Hertz, etc. And then coming down from the peak experience, you see a relaxation in the brain spectrogram, and finally, at the end point, it's curious because now you can actually see a depletion in the focus function. This software also measures focus and alertness. And this is actually not looking at all like her recovered state, even though she's purportedly feeling recovered. This is the percent difference over her baseline scores in her self-reported state of the pre-state before the entheogen, the peak experience, the post-peak and recovered. So these are subjective states or aspects of the experience. And during the peak, actually, she experienced a minus 20+% diminution in 40 Hertz. Post-peak, that increased, and then as she recovered, it became similar to baseline. So it's a bifurcated response, first below baseline and then above. Conclusions are as follows. Experienced meditators who presumably cultivate higher states of consciousness can produce greater amplitudes of 40 Hertz from the prefrontal region than non-meditators during neurofeedback. Descriptions of the 40 Hertz state were similar in meditators and non-meditators, with feelings of bliss and love as being most prevalent. Salvia divinorum produced abrupt changes in 40 Hertz brainwaves with a substantial decrease at peak experience, followed by a substantial increase before returning to baseline. The limitations of the study is small, it's incomplete, still in progress. I only have 3 meditators, but hopefully I'd like to get equal numbers of meditators and non-meditators and do a statistical analysis of the quantitative aspects in the end. Also, the Salvia divinorum case is singular and may or not be representative. And I should also say that it's very difficult to describe inner states of higher consciousness in words, and that, of course, puts limitations on what we can gather about it. Questions for further study that relate to some of our interests in this group are, does training gamma brainwaves help improve meditation and or increase the experience of higher states of consciousness? And secondly, does training gamma brainwaves from the prefrontal region help open the so-called third eye, and improve subject performance in healing and psi research studies. Those questions remain to be seen, and I hope to explore them. Thank you.
I would like to indulge in the pleasure of the first question, and this is, we do so much with the brain, and I keep going to the heart and wondering, is there a way to dovetail some of this research with the heart, considering that many of the statements that were made were really coming from a place of what we say heart, and there are so many heart attacks and heart ailments in society that maybe that higher state, we may be missing something.
Well, of course, there have been other studies, I'd say particularly looking at coherence of the Fourier analysis of heart frequencies of emission. And I just haven't done that here, but I think I could add that. I have heart rate variability equipment, but this was just exploring, an initial study to explore 40 hertz and higher consciousness, and just the beginning.
Yes, hi. Hi, Beverly, it's Maria.
Ah.
Great study. I wanted to know specifically your baseline activity. What did you have them do? Did you give them a specific instruction?
I did. I gave them a very specific instruction, and I don't have that for you to read, but it was putting your mind in a neutral state, not thinking about anything in particular from the past, present, or even going into the future, to just maintain a relaxed, open-eyed gaze without focusing actively on anything particular. That was essentially it. I read something to them, and actually they also could look at it to be sure they understood it.
Okay, just one more thing quickly. Glad to hear that you had their subjective responses too, even though they were hard to put into words. That is so valuable for this kind of research.
Thank you.
Charlie Emmons. You might think that when people go into altered states, they might have increase in some of the lower frequencies like theta and alpha, and I wondered if there was a correlation between higher rates of gamma, higher amplitudes of gamma, and at the same time increase in some of the lower frequencies.
I didn't ask that question in my study, and nor did Davidson in his study, and I can't remember whether Lutz did this. So these are the main studies in recent years on 40 hertz and meditators. Again, all of these things could be explored. It's just a matter of taking more data simultaneously.
Hi, Beverly. Juan Acosta. I've done now close to 20 subjects on the Salvia divinorum. A preliminary report is being published in Journal of Neurotherapy. I presented last year at ISNR. And I haven't looked at gamma, but a very consistent effect is suppression of power in all frequency bands. And sometimes there's an alpha rebound during the return to ordinary reality state. So I'd love to talk over this data with you and stuff. Now, as I mentioned, a better, possibly entheogen to look at gamma is ayahuasca, and there are currently studies looking at that. And that state does produce a very enhanced state of consciousness. It's lasting several hours, so there's a good place to look for that too.
Have you found it to be contextual one with people under different experiences of salvia? Because everybody has a different trip, obviously.
Salvia is such a powerful experience, you know, with the extract. You have the people that can surrender to it completely, and then you have the people that don't let go. The ones that surrender completely usually have a very positive experience. I haven't, you know, I wish I'd recorded all of the reports because they were amazing descriptions, but none of them were along the lines of, I had an enlightenment experience or I had a very high state of awareness or something. They were mostly having to do with distortions of space-time, bodily...
That's right. That's what I had in this particular case as well. This particular subject experienced herself, get ready for this, as a crayon.
Yes, yes.
Yes, indeed. With a pointed head and just a body like a cylinder, and and went through some anxiety whether she would be a crayon forever.
That's right.
And so the beginning part of that, especially the peak, was a bit of anxiety and lots of movement. Towards the recordings, but that was her experience.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time, but let's give Beverly a great big round of applause.